Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. North Korea has been ratcheting up the tension on the peninsula with continuous provocations against Seoul and Washington's ongoing joint military drills, firing several cruise missiles from Hamhung area on Wednesday morning, that's today, conducting a two-day drill simulating a tactical nuclear attack, and just before that, test firing a Hwasong-17 ICBM. Though there are calls to hold Pyongyang accountable for conducting such provocations, the UNSC has been unable to take action as China and Russia, with veto powers, oppose going against North Korea. What are the latest updates and how should the international community deal with this? For an in-depth analysis of the tensions on the peninsula, we welcome Doctor Go Myong-hyun, Senior Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, into the studio. Dr. Go, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
And we also have Mark Barry, Associate Editor Emeritus at the International Journal on World Peace, on the line. Dr. Barry, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
All right. First question to you, Dr. Go. North Korea recently said that it conducted drills simulating a tactical nuclear counterattack over the weekend. And before we get into the details of the drills, I'd like to know, are these kind of drills usual one, or was this newly choreographed response to Seoul and Washington's annual joint military exercise?
So I wouldn't really say it's unusual one. It's quite recent that the North Koreans have started exercising with the tactical nuclear capabilities. But then in a way we can say it's the new normal, because we expect North Koreans to continue carrying out such exercises into the near future. For instance, Kim Jong-un had announced that they had held a tactical nuclear weapons exercise last year in October, involving a lot more units. In fact, they also combined exercise that included not just the missile forces, but also the Air Force and other types of ground units. So in that sense, I think the North Koreans are really mean to say that they have acquired a tactical nuclear capability, and that now they are financing it, and then actually they are fine-tuning their capabilities. So again, I think North Koreans are going to do this a lot more in the future.
Right, I see. Now, according to the KCNA, on the second day of the drill, like we have just said, the regime staged a ballistic missile launch drill to simulate tactical nuclear attack, and the missile reportedly exploded in the air 800 meters above the East Sea after flying 800 kilometers. What significance does this have?
Well, this is essentially a demonstration of the threat that North Koreans have been issuing ever since the North Korean claimed that they had become a nuclear power. North Koreans are, the idea of a nuclear threat from North Korea had been abstract. We knew that North Korea had actual nuclear capabilities, but then, and then we could also easily estimate and imagine how North Korea will use it, or what kind of damage and destruction that would cause in case of North Korean nuclear attacks. But I think North Koreans are also trying to essentially add details to it and then make their threat more realistic in a sense. So the recent scenario that North Koreans are trying to show with the airburst of their tactical, not tactical nuclear missile in this case, an exercise missile 800 meters from ground, is that they are showing the effect of an airburst of a tactical nuclear missile. And this is a typical way any military would use their missiles, not just the nuclear weapons, but also conventional ones. The reason why they explode their missiles in the air is because it maximizes the destruction on the ground. So that's the reason why they do it. And with the nuclear weapons, with more explosive power, it means that there will be more destruction on the ground. So for instance, if North Korea carried out a nuclear attack against Seoul, and they exploded nuclear warheads, say 800 meters from ground, just above the downtown Seoul, that would cause at least the radius of destruction would be like 11 kilometers, and then I think that 500,000 people would be either dead or wounded in that case. So in that sense, I think North Koreans are essentially trying to make their threat more realistic. And then also, this is, in a way, you can see this as a preview of what North Korea could do with an ICBM test. North Korea have been threatening to carry out normal ICBM test, meaning a normal, so launching an ICBM at a normal angle, which demonstrates the actual range of such a capability. And then I think, in a way, with the tactical nuclear missiles, they are essentially hinting that the next round of provocations from North Korea could involve an actual ICBM.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Berry, right after the North Korea's missile launch, the US B-1B strategic bombers joined the joint exercises. And though the defense ministry says this was a planned one, some say the move could have been choreographed to show a firm response to the North's provocations. What is your takeaway on this?
I assume that B-1Bs are regularly involved in these exercises because they're the only visible example of American and allied nuclear capability. There are no land-based nuclear devices on the Korean Peninsula since the early 1990s, and the sea-based ones, well, we don't talk about them. They're somewhere out at sea, and you supposedly can't locate them. So it's a visible demonstration, and they're accompanied by the F-35As, the F-16s, and we last saw them on March 8th, I believe, and I believe we saw the B-1B several times last year. So to me, they're a regular part of the joint exercises. And again, they're very visual, they make a point, and I think that suits the current purposes of the present administration in the U.S.
Right. Now, Dr. Go, moving on, South Korea and the United States kicked off their first large-scale amphibious landing exercise in 5 years, the so-called Sangyeong training. What does this exercise entail?
Well, this is essentially an amphibious landing exercise combining not just the South Korean forces, but also the U.S. Marines. And this is the idea that the North Korea, and if North Korea attacks South Korea in a conventional sense, in that kind of, that attack actually is a part of a full-scale war, then the South Korean military as well as the U.S. forces will respond by executing a landing on a North Korean base, probably near Wonsan. So this is very similar to what happened during the Cold War 73 years ago, the so-called Incheon landing, which turned the tide of war in that war. So I think it's probably true that the North Koreans are traumatized by the experience because they're so near achieving victory back then, but then because of this very a strategic move on the part of the United Nations forces, North Korea had to abandon their war efforts and essentially withdraw back to North Korea. So I think this is the idea that South Korea and the United States are trying to send a message to the North Koreans that if there's a major provocation or a major effort to attack South Korea, then the United States and South Korea will respond back in a forceful way. And then in that sense, it's going to be, in that case, the effort will be to achieve a complete unification of the Korean Peninsula under the South Korean leadership.
Right, so for us to easily understand, it's similar to the Incheon landing by MacArthur, right?
Exactly, there's that element there, yes.
Right, interesting. Now, Dr. Berry, in response to such a large-scale amphibious landing exercise, how do you believe North Korea might react? I mean, what kind of provocations could possibly take place?
They're going to continue to improve technologies that they've demonstrated since the military parade last month. And I think they're incensed. It was just announced earlier today, your time, that perhaps the largest joint exercises ever would take place in June. So I was going to say that we should expect North Korea to continue to respond in the provocative way that they have, at least through Kim Il-sung's birth anniversary on April 15th, through the end of April. And of course, President Yoon will have his state visit on the 26th and 27th of April. But now I would modify that and say that they're going to continue to do this at least through June because the U.S. is celebrating, if you will, the 70th anniversary of the beginning of the U.S.-ROK alliance. I would add, however, that we're also at a little over the 4-year mark since the failure of the Hanoi summit, and we are in this place because that summit failed. I could talk at length about that, but I think we should note that there were no military exercises after the, to speak of at least, after the Singapore summit. But it all went downhill after the failure of the Hanoi summit 4 years ago.
Right, so the provocations would have to continue until June, right? Dr. Go, before we move on to international politics, South Korea levied unilateral sanctions on Pyongyang by preparing a list of 77 items that are related to regime's satellite industry. And the sanctions also included 4 individuals and 6 organizations tied to North Korea's nuclear and missile development. How significant is this sanction, and will it be effective?
So it's difficult to evaluate the impact of sanctions on North Korea, but then personally, I think it has had a significant impact on their development, especially when it comes to composite materials that's required to make the re-entry vehicles for North Korea. For North Korean ballistic missiles. And in the case of military satellites, we know for a fact that Kim Jong-un aspires to achieve the military satellite technology in the near future. So we expect North Korea to launch a satellite this year, and the reason is because North Korea is probably trying to camouflage their ICBM development as if this is in fact on a space vehicle to put their satellites in orbit. So, but then even if they did so, our estimation is that North Korea's military satellite technology is still quite rudimentary. So going forward, it will require a lot more launches and then perfecting their satellite technologies, and also more time. And they will have to rely on foreign sources to perfect their satellite technology. That's where these new sanctions measures come in. South Korea is a major producer of high-tech components and communication devices, as well as electronics. And one way or another, the North Koreans will have to purchase or procure components from South Korea, not directly, but probably through a third country. And so this is when the sanctions essentially reminds the companies in South Korea which produces like a relevant technology and then components to pay more attention to what's going on. And this is the idea that the companies should understand who their customers are, and they ensure that the end users of their products are not going to be the sanctioned entities mentioned in the new announcement. So, so even though it's unlikely that the new measures are going to prevent North Korea from launching the military satellite, that's very much expected to happen this year. Going forward, these sanctions are likely is going to prevent North Korea from perfecting their military satellite technology.
Right, I see. So though we do not know the impact yet, it certainly is a significant one. Right. Now, Dr. Berry, moving on to the international politics. Last Thursday, North Korea fired a Hwasong 17 ICBM just several hours before President Yoon Suk-yeol embarked on his journey to see his Japanese counterpart, Fumio Kishida. And regarding this ICBM launch, foreign ministers of G7 nations on Sunday said they regret the inaction by the UNSC, noting obstruction from some members, namely China and Russia. I mean, is there any way the UNSC can effectively tackle further provocations from North Korea?
You'll recall during the days of fire and fury in 2017, China and Russia were supporting the sanctions on North Korea because they realized that their relations with the U.S., fragile as they were at that time, were more important than backing North Korea. But we're in a different ballgame today. Actually, there is sometimes unfortunate continuity in U.S. policy as well as discontinuities. And so what we now have is where China had previously played a very constructive role, I would say, in the early 1990s, and also in hosting the 6-party talks. But now they want to oppose U.S. policy. But frankly speaking, China and Russia, as I've said on the air in the past, have had good things to contribute, good ideas to contribute, which have not been taken into account by the U.S. But today it's more of a stance. It's really trying to thwart any furtherance of a joint front between the U.S., the EU, Japan, and South Korea.
Right, I see. Dr. Barry, one more question to you. We already know that Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin held meetings this week, and they called North Korea's concerns legitimate and reasonable, and even urged the United States to respond to this. How is this apparent bloc made up of Russia, China, and North Korea going to affect tensions on the peninsula?
Well, that's what I was referring to, which is that the positions that Russia and China took in their joint statement yesterday are very consistent with the positions that they took in the early 1990s. I was there. I was in the middle of a lot of that. Unfortunately, they're not to be taken at face value any longer in 2023. I would actually caution and say that I don't really see it as being a large bloc, but as David Ignatius of the Washington Post said yesterday, in many ways, President Xi is the president of Eurasia. And this is marking a moment where Putin's Russia has become a lesser state, just another larger bordering state on China. And North Korea postures in support of the foreign policies of Russia and China. But in fact, I think it's exercises which appear to be aimed against the U.S., Japan, and South Korea are actually just as much aimed at China, just as much aimed at Russia, because the most precious thing for North Korea is its sovereignty and its independence. And it will not allow China or anyone else to infringe upon that. So we have to recognize that all of that weaponry can be used in a 360-degree direction. And I think that's the real message that North Korea is trying to send amidst its two large superpowers that neighbor it.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, shifting gears a little bit here, the United States held an informal meeting of the UNSC members on human rights abuses in North Korea. And regarding this, the U.S. ambassador to the UN said North Korean leader Kim Jong-un should be held accountable for North Korea's human rights violations, perhaps by addressing the problem through the International Criminal Court, which is ICC. And considering the ICC approved an arrest warrant for Russia's president recently, would this be a possible, course of action?
Well, clearly there's a linkage between North Korea's development of weapons of mass destruction. More concretely, we know that North Korea carried out nuclear tests at the Punggye test site 6 times since 2006, and more recently in 2017. So in the course of 11 years, it's likely that the environment in the Punggye test site has been highly contaminated by radiation, and then it is believed that there's a radiation seepage into the groundwater, which is going to carry the radiation down to the population that living in the region. And in our estimation, there are at least 2 million people living in the counties bordering the Punggye test site. So we're talking about a baseline population of 2 million people who are potentially exposed to radiation in a repeated way in the last 17 years. So I think we're seeing some effects of that among the defectors. So South Korean government has been carrying out radiation testing of defectors coming to South Korea since 2017, and they have found some cases already, which actually led the previous government to shut down the program. So it's a controversial issue, but at the same time, it's a real issue and a real challenge. So and the fact is that the regime has been really negligent, and not just indifferent, but negligent and then intentional in poisoning their own people. So clearly, it constitutes a crime against humanity, and this is a ground for taking Kim Jong-un to the ICC. And there are already other grounds for taking Kim Jong-un to the International Criminal Court. This was the conclusion reached by the Commission of Inquiry on North Korean Human Rights back in 2014, which started in 2013. So this year marks the 10th year anniversary of the establishment of the COI, the Commission of Inquiry. So in that report, the COI concluded that Kim Jong-un was sitting at the top of this regime or system that was carrying out grave and systematic violations of human rights in North Korea. So the report recommended the international community to take Kim Jong-un and members of the top leadership to the International Criminal Court. So that was the conclusion they reached almost 10 years ago. And now there's another movement to remind the world the gravity of the human rights situation in North Korea and the responsibility that lies with the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. So, taking Kim Jong-un to the ICC is a possibility, and I think it's a much more realistic, and then it's something that we should do, in fact, than than what we're doing right now, which is just not bringing up the issue of human rights violations in North Korea to the forefront of our dialogue with North Korea. So yes, I think this is going to, even though the discussion about human rights violations in North Korea has been quite muted in the past 5 years or so, I think this is going to return to the table in the near future.
Right, so taking Kim Jong-un to the ICC is not only a possible move, but also a necessary one.
Very much so.
Right, right. Now, Dr. Berry, the last question, I think. Considering the turbulent changes in international society, what direction do you believe North Korea's pattern of provocations might take, in your opinion?
Well, as I said, they're going to continue doing this, but I don't think they're going to do a seventh nuclear test. As I said last time, this is the new President Xi, and he's made it very clear that China will not tolerate a seventh nuclear test. But I will note, I think that with the state visit of President Yoon, this is a fantastic opportunity for President Yoon to do something historic and heroic, and he should strongly recommend to President Biden that the two countries offer to President Xi to begin negotiations about creating a permanent end to the Korean War, signing a comprehensive peace agreement that will cover nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. Because President Biden, from midsummer on, and certainly all through 2024, will be totally involved in a re-election campaign, assuming he declares that he's going to run. And so this is the opportunity to do it. And President Biden will respect President Yoon for suggesting that. And because China is a signatory to the armistice, it's in President Xi's interest to help preside over a final settlement of the Korean War. He will get the credit. President Yoon will get the credit. President Biden will get the credit. And also it will benefit Kim Jong-un. It's a win-win situation, in my view.
Right, I see. I'd like to ask more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Dr. Go, as usual, and Dr. Berry for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, this is all for Within the Frame tonight. We will be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.